One quiet night in Lancaster, California, a single mother unknowingly breaks company policy to help a tired stranger outside a closed McDonald's, unaware that this man is Elon Musk. Her small act of defiance costs her everything, or does it? The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of sticky plastic booths, the McDonald's fryer exhaling one final hiss of grease as closing time approached. Denise Holloway moved with quiet precision behind the counter, her hands quick and practiced, her feet aching from the 10-hour shift. At 32, she had mastered the rhythm of fast food life, cheerful nods to difficult customers, silent endurance, through condescending managers, and the occasional stolen moment to breathe in the cramped walk-in freezer when the world became too much. Outside, Lancaster's desert night had turned cold, the wind sweeping grit across the parking lot. She wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, thinking of her son, Micah. 8 years old and asleep by now, probably with one leg kicked over the side of the bed, snoring softly, a Spider-Man comic still open on his chest. The thought softened. Her life was hard, but there was love in it. "All right, that's it," barked Denny, the night manager, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Lock the doors, no more customers." Denise nodded and moved to the front, fingers already reaching for the key hanging from her belt loop when she saw headlights pull into the lot. The car was expensive, sleek, matte black, and silent. A Tesla. Out stepped a tall man in a hoodie and jeans, his hair windblown, eyes tired but alert. He approached with hesitation, tapping lightly on the glass door with 2 fingers. "Sorry." "We're closed," she called through the door, mouthing the words with a gentle shrug. But he didn't leave. He stepped closer, palms up, and said something through the glass she couldn't quite hear. Denise hesitated. There was something odd about his face, familiar but not quite placeable. He looked like someone she'd seen on the news or in a documentary Micah had forced her to watch on YouTube. But her mind was too tired to connect the dots. She cracked the door open. "Sir, I really can't let you in. We're closed. No, I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and controlled, almost rehearsed. "I lost my wallet. I've been driving all day. I haven't eaten. I don't have my phone. Could I please just get a burger or anything? I can pay you back tomorrow, or triple, whatever." She blinked, skeptical, but there was something vulnerable about him, not the entitled arrogance of most late-night stragglers. He looked human and exhausted. She glanced back at Denny, who was in the back with earbuds in, head bobbing to music. Her hand hovered over the door. She knew this could cost her, but something deeper stirred in her chest, an echo of nights when she'd skipped dinner. To make sure Micah ate, nights she prayed someone would show her mercy. "1 burger," she said quietly. "Fau, stay right there, don't come in." His expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you." She moved quickly, heating the grill again. Bun, patty, lettuce, pickle, no frills. She poured a fresh Coke and slipped it all into a bag. Man stood patiently, arms folded against the cold. She opened the door just enough to pass it through. He looked at her. Really looked at her. "What's your name?" "Denise," she said cautiously. He nodded, holding her gaze. "Thank you." "Denise, you didn't have to do that." Then he left, no business card, no offer. Just a quiet thanks and the whisper of tires against pavement as the Tesla slipped back into the night. The next morning, she was called into Denny's office. He didn't look up from his tablet. "You served a customer after close." She stood, her ground. "It was 1 burger. He was stranded. I paid for it myself." Denny finally looked up, eyes narrow. "Doesn't matter. That's against policy. Someone saw the security footage. You're done." Just like that. No warning, no second chance, no consideration for her 3 years of loyalty. She walked out of the McDonald's with her apron folded, under her arm, heart pounding and throat tight. Bills screamed in her mind. Rent due in 4 days, Micah's field trip she'd promised to pay for, the last $200 in her account, holding on like a lifeline. She sat in her car in the parking lot, tears threatening behind her eyes. How could something so small unravel everything? 2 days later, she received a call from an unknown number. A clipped, British-accented woman introduced herself as an assistant to Mr. Elon Musk. Denise froze. The woman continued. "Mr. Musk would..." Like to speak with you in person. He said you showed extraordinary kindness when you didn't know who he was. He remembers. Denise didn't breathe. Her mind scrambled. The man in the hoodie. Before she could respond, the woman added, "He's offering you a position at SpaceX." There was a long pause, the kind that makes silence feel like a rising tide. "A position," Denise managed, "as a community outreach liaison. He believes you have a unique perspective and a way with people that's hard to find." Denise's hands trembled. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where a photo of her and Micah dangled from a keychain. "I don't know anything about rockets," she whispered. "You know about people," the assistant replied. Denise exhaled. But as the weight of it settled in her chest, questions rose like smoke. Why? Her? Why this job? And what exactly was she walking into? Then came the knock at her car window. She turned, startled, to see two men in dark suits. "Ms. Holloway," one asked, "we're here to take you to Mr. Musk." And just like that, her ordinary life vanished in the rear view. The black town car rolled smoothly down the freeway, its tinted windows muting the harsh California sun to a soft golden haze. Denise sat stiffly in the back seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the leather cold beneath her palms. The two suited men in the front hadn't said much beyond a polite greeting. They weren't menacing exactly, but something about their composure made her feel like she was being chauffeured into another world, not invited. She kept glancing at her phone. No texts from Micah's school. He was fine. She'd told her neighbor, Clarice, to watch him for a few hours, though she hadn't exactly explained where she was going. What could she even say? "Hey, can I ask you something?" she finally said, leaning forward. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "Of course, ma'am. Where exactly are we going?" "To Hawthorne, SpaceX HQ." Denise blinked. That made it real, not just an idea or fantasy. Hawthorne, SpaceX, Elon Musk. Her body pressed deeper into the seat. The Tesla man with the tired eyes and quiet voice. She had offered him a burger, and now she was en route to the headquarters of a billion-dollar space company. She stared out the window as the desert gave way to city blocks, warehouses and tech campuses replacing gas stations and strip malls. A thought stabbed at her. What if it's a mistake? What if they meant someone else? Or worse, what if it was a setup, a prank? Her stomach knotted. The car pulled into a sleek, guarded campus flanked by tall fencing and rows of matte black Teslas. She stepped out slowly, awed by the monolithic glass building ahead, sunlight bouncing off the panels like a sci-fi movie set. A tall woman in a crisp white suit greeted her. "At the door, Miss Holloway," she said with a diplomatic smile. "I'm Amelia, right this way." Inside, the SpaceX lobby was clean, minimal, and humming with purpose. Engineers moved briskly, voices low and focused. She passed a life-sized model of a Falcon 9 rocket and a massive digital display showing a real-time countdown to the next launch. Denise tried not to shrink beneath the weight of it all. She felt like she was walking into a future she didn't belong in, like she had stepped into a world where everyone spoke a language she hadn't been taught. They led her through a long glass hallway and up two elevators. On the top floor, Amelia gestured toward a set of double doors. "He's inside. He asked to speak to you alone." Denise hesitated before pushing the doors open. The office was surprisingly sparse. Her standing desk, a couch, a giant screen looping footage of Mars terrain. And there he was, hoodie again, this time paired with slightly less rumpled jeans. Elon Musk, framed by a wall of glass overlooking Los Angeles. He turned when he heard her enter. "Denise." She nodded slowly. "So it really was you." He smiled faintly. "You looked me in the eye and didn't flinch. That's rare." "I didn't know who you were." "Exactly," he said. "That's what made it real." Denise swallowed. "I didn't do anything special. I gave you a burger. Anyone with sense would have done the same." He walked over to the couch, gesturing for her to sit, but they didn't. "You did." She sat cautiously, hands still clenched. "I'm not offering you charity," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "You lost your job because you showed kindness over protocol. That matters to me." "Why? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're a single mother. I know you've been working minimum wage jobs for years. I know you didn't hesitate to help a stranger even though it cost you everything. His gaze sharpened. I want that kind of instinct working for me. She tilted her head. You said something about a liaison role? He nodded. Community, outreach. We've got tech, we've got innovation. What we don't always have is connection to the real people outside these walls. You'd work with schools, communities, local governments, educate, advocate, find talent where no one else is looking, especially among kids like your son. Denise felt a strange mix of awe and suspicion. But I don't have a degree. I've never worked in an office. I'm not a spokesperson. You are, he said firmly. You just don't see it yet. She looked away, her eyes stinging. And what about Micah? I can't leave him behind. I'm not some single flexible intern. Bring him. We'll help with housing, childcare, whatever you need. We're not trying to use you, Denise. We're trying to partner with you. A long silence followed. The air was still. She heard her own heartbeat. I need to think, she whispered. This is big. Take a few days, he said, standing. But know this. You have a voice people trust. You've been in rooms most of us haven't. And if you say yes, you'll change more than your life. You'll change theirs too. She left the office in a daze. Emilia escorted her to a conference room where a packet sat waiting. Job offer, salary, benefits. Denise didn't even touch it. She stared out the window at the sprawling campus below, trying to process. Later that night, after tucking Micah into bed, she stood at the sink, washing dishes in silence. The house was quiet, the weight of the day pressing down on her like wet concrete. She thought of the SpaceX office, the clean walls, the buzz of invention. She thought of her worn-down apartment with its flickering hallway light and the sound of neighbors arguing through the wall. Could she really belong in that other world? The next day, as she walked Micah to school, he skipped beside her, chattering. About a science project. At the gate, he looked up at her, eyes bright. Mom, do you think people ever live on Mars? She paused, swallowing a lump in her throat. Maybe sooner than you think, baby. That afternoon, she returned to SpaceX. Emilia met her at the door. He's expecting you. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked past the rocket display, through the glass hallway, up the elevators. When she stepped into the office, Elon didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, waiting. I want to do it, she said, but I'm not going to be a puppet. You won't be, he said. I want a say in how it's done, where we focus, who we help. I'm not just doing this to cash a check. His expression shifted, something closer to respect. Then we'll start right away. As they shook hands, a question lingered in her mind. Why me, really? She didn't ask it. Not yet. But that night, as she stood in her kitchen and reread the contract by the dim stovelight, she found a small handwritten note tucked in the back of the folder. It wasn't signed. All it said was, "You saw me as a person. Now I want the world to see you too." The words lived in Denise's mind like a heartbeat, quiet but constant, pulsing behind every step she took through the SpaceX campus. The walls no longer felt foreign, but they didn't quite feel like hers. Yet either. She walked with measured confidence like a guest in someone else's home, politely invited but still unsure which doors she was allowed to open. Her official title was Community Impact Liaison, though that didn't mean much to anyone yet. Her first weeks were spent in meetings where people smiled too wide or not at all. Engineers with degrees from MIT, public relations execs with perfect LinkedIn profiles, and managers who looked her up and down like they were trying to figure out what box she fit in. None of them asked how she got there. But the question hung in every hallway she passed through. She was placed in a small office near the outreach division, where a metal desk, a donated potted plant, and a flickering smart screen awaited her. On her first day, the assistant director of comms, Rachel, a woman in heels that clicked with purpose, stopped by unannounced, arms crossed. "So, you're the Denise." The emphasis made her stomach twist. "Just Denise," she replied coolly. Rachel offered a brittle smile. "Elon tends to follow instinct. We're still figuring out where you'll be most useful." Denise smiled back, matching her tone. "I already know where I'll be useful. It's just a matter of who's willing to listen." Rachel blinked, caught off guard by the edge. "Well, let's hope so." She walked out with a sharp pivot, leaving behind a tension that didn't fade for hours. Despite the corporate frost, Denise got to work. She spent her days calling schools in underserved districts, setting up free science and robotics workshops, led by real SpaceX engineers. She visited local churches and rec centers on weekends, speaking to families who'd never imagined a future for their kids beyond minimum wage and broken promises. She saw herself in their eyes, and they trusted her, not because she worked for a tech empire, but because she was them. When Elon called her into his office 2 weeks later, she brought a folder thick with photos, schedules, and handwritten thank you letters from students. He scanned them quietly, eyes slowing when he reached a photo of a shy black girl holding up a model rocket. She asked if black girls were allowed to be astronauts. Denise said, her voice steady. I told her there's no permission needed, just opportunity. He looked up, something unreadable in his gaze. Then he smiled. This is exactly what I hoped you'd do. But even as the praise came, Denise felt the shift around her. Whispers, emails she was no longer CC'd on, suggestions that her initiatives were off-brand or unvetted. A subtle pullback of access, the kind of sabotage that didn't make noise, but left a mark. It came to a head one Thursday during a planning meeting for a major press event, a nationwide initiative called Launch Futures, aimed at funding STEM programs in low-income communities. It was Denise's idea. Her voice had shaped every part of it, from the name to the rollout plan, and now she was watching it be discussed like she wasn't even in the room. Rachel stood at the front, clicking through a sleek PowerPoint. And for the spokesperson, we're thinking maybe someone with a bit more polish, someone with media training who can hit the talking points. Denise raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Rachel didn't look her way. We just want the rollout to go smoothly. Optics are everything. Optics? Denise said, her voice firm. Oh, you mean you don't want someone like me up there, someone who doesn't look or sound like your usual brand? Rachel finally faced her. This isn't personal. It's absolutely personal, Denise snapped, standing. I built this initiative. I brought in the partners. I wrote the goddamn mission statement. But now that cameras are involved, I'm not good enough to be the face of it? The room went still. A junior PR rep shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Rachel took a breath, softening her tone. Denise, you're new to this world. There are ways things are done. We're trying to protect the message. Denise stepped forward, jaw tight. You don't protect the message by erasing the messenger. You protect it by standing behind it. And if you think I'm going to sit quietly while you hijack something built from real struggle, you picked the wrong woman. She left the meeting before Rachel could respond, heart thundering. She expected someone to follow her. No one did. That night, back home, she sat on the couch with Micah curled beside her. His eyes were locked on a cartoon, his head resting on her arm, but she wasn't watching. She was replaying the moment in the boardroom, Rachel's smug restraint, the cowardly silence of everyone else. She had stood up. But at what cost? A message pinged on her phone, from a number she didn't recognize. They're trying to cut your legs out. Thought you should know. Attached was a forwarded internal email thread, high-level names, words like containment, optics risk, and PR overreach. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. One line burned into her memory. She's emotionally reactive, brilliant with people, but not a long-term fit for our direction. Denise stared at the screen, a quiet fury building beneath her ribs. They didn't see her as a threat because she was incompetent. They saw her as a threat because she was effective. And somewhere in that same building, people were trying to shut her down. She closed the laptop and looked at her sleeping son. His tiny hand was still curled on her arm, trusting and warm. No one was going to erase her. Not now. Not when so many were watching. Not when she had a voice that kids like Micah finally recognized as their own. But she also knew this. A storm was coming. Someone in that company wanted her out. And if she didn't move carefully, the next meeting wouldn't end in argument. It would end in exile. That was the weight Denise carried the next morning as she walked through the gleaming doors of SpaceX. The same halls that once sparked awe now felt sharpened, every reflection in the glass like a set of watching eyes. She kept her back straight, but her pulse was electric under her skin. She passed Rachel in the hallway. The woman didn't flinch, just offered a tight, neutral nod that might as well have been a warning. Denise nodded back. War it is. She spent the day combing through everything, her files, messages, outreach contacts, internal memos. She needed to be ready. Whatever Rachel and the others were planning, it wouldn't be obvious. It would be quiet, slow, like a tide. They'd paint her as unstable, unqualified, a liability. The fallout would come disguised as restructuring or budget reallocation. They'd bury her work and scrub her name from the program she built. But Denise had learned something about power. It hated unpredictability. And she was done being predictable. At 6:03 p.m., long after most of the team had left, she stood outside Elon's office, one hand clutching the folder she had built like armor. She hadn't asked for a meeting. She was taking one. His assistant blinked when she walked in. "I'll wait," Denise said simply. 30 minutes later, the door opened. "Denise." Elon sounded surprised, maybe even slightly amused. "Come in." She stepped inside without hesitation, settling into the seat across from him. She didn't wait for him to ask why she was there. "They're pushing me out," she said, his brows knit. "Who is?" "Rachel. Half the outreach team. I've seen the emails. They don't want me here." Elon leaned back, thoughtful. "That happens. Change threatens people. This isn't just about change," she said, placing the folder in front of him. "This is about control. I didn't come here to be someone's mascot. I didn't come to smile and wave at press events while people like Rachel rewrite my work. I came here to make sure kids like Micah see themselves in this place." He opened the folder slowly, flipping through program outlines, testimonials, grant approvals she'd negotiated herself. Evidence. Proof. "I've created something real here," she said. "But they're trying to erase me before it can even grow." He looked at her, quiet, calculating. "You want me to fire her?" he asked. "No," she said, surprising even herself. "I want you to see what's happening. I want accountability. And I want a seat at the table I earned. No more sidelines, no more middlemen. You brought me in for a reason. Either you stand by that, or you don't." Silence stretched long and tight between them. Then Elon closed the folder, steepled his hands. "You're not easy to manage, Denise. I'm not here to be managed." He gave a low chuckle, something shifting in his expression. "I brought you here because you think in ways we don't. You move people. But if you want to survive here, you'll need allies. And you'll need to be strategic." She leaned forward. "Then help me build something they can't ignore." For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. "Let's talk next steps. No one's pushing you out, not on my watch." But Denise knew better than to relax. Elon's word mattered, but so did momentum. If she wanted this change to last, it couldn't be about her. It had to be bigger. She left that office with fire in her chest and a plan forming behind her eyes. That weekend, Denise drove out to Watts, one of the hardest-hit communities she'd grown up near. A local high school had agreed to host the first Launch Futures Live, an event she'd quietly arranged outside of SpaceX channels. No press, just real people. She stood in the middle of the gym, watching kids file in, some wide-eyed, others skeptical. Parents stood along the edges, curious. Tables were lined with 3D printed rocket models, solar kits, virtual simulators brought in by tech volunteers she'd recruited herself. No filters, no branding gloss. Then came the voice she hadn't expected. "You did all this?" Denise turned to see Rachel standing at the back of the room, arms crossed again, but this time there was no smugness, just confusion. "Thought you didn't like off-brand events," Denise said evenly. Rachel looked around. "You went around the department." "I was the department. You just didn't notice." For a long beat, Rachel didn't speak. "These kids, they're listening to you," she finally said. "They see someone who knows what it's like to choose between electricity and groceries. That matters more than a clean press release." Rachel's posture softened just slightly. "You were right," she said. "We've been treating you like a liability." Denise studied her. And maybe I need to rethink what value." Looks like it wasn't an apology. But it wasn't nothing. Later, as Denise helped a group of 10-year-olds assemble tiny robotic arms, one of the girls looked up at her and asked, Do you think someone like me could work in a place like SpaceX? Denise knelt beside her. You already do. The girl grinned, and Denise's heart cracked open. She looked around at the gym full of futures shifting in real time, the quiet clink of tools, the rustle of dreams unfolding, and yet something lingered at the edge of her thoughts. That message. The forwarded email. Someone had sent it. Someone inside the walls was rooting for her in the shadows. But why hadn't they come forward? Why stay anonymous? And more urgently, if there was someone secretly helping her, was there someone else quietly working to destroy her? The question haunted Denise in the days that followed, threading through every interaction like static behind a song. She smiled in meetings, gave confident pitches, shook hands with school officials and community leaders, but underneath, her instincts were burning. Something was off. The event in Watts had made waves, even without official SpaceX backing. Word spread fast. Local news picked it up. Parents shared clips on social media. Kids posted photos with captions like "Future Astronaut" and "First time I believed I could." It wasn't just a hit, it was a movement, and suddenly Denise was no longer invisible. She found herself getting invited into meetings that once happened without her. Department heads who'd avoided eye contact now sent congratulatory emails. Rachel, now tentatively respectful, had even asked Denise to help draft the next public-facing initiative. It felt good. It felt earned. But she hadn't forgotten the anonymous message. The one that had warned her. The one that had changed everything. One morning, just past sunrise, Denise walked into her office and found a yellow envelope waiting. On her desk, no address, no name, just her first name in black ink. She looked around. The hallway was empty. Her hand hovered before she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed, clean, short. Check the outreach grant account. There's a reason your project was nearly shut down. She didn't hesitate. Denise logged into the internal SpaceX grant management system. It was heavily protected, but she'd been given limited access to her own budget line weeks ago. She'd never thought to look deeper until now. Her eyes scanned the numbers. A $250,000 allocation marked for community outreach had been quietly diverted. Weeks ago, reclassified under external marketing consulting, she clicked the reference code. A name populated, R. Levinson Consulting Group. Rachel. Her heart didn't just race, it surged. Denise gathered her documentation and walked unannounced into Elon's office. He looked up from his desk, caught between surprise and curiosity. You said to come to you if anything was off, she said, voice tight. Well, this is off. She dropped the printouts on his desk. Line items, dates, transfers, proof. She redirected funds out of the program. That's why they tried to suffocate it. They were bleeding it dry while I fought to keep it alive. Elon's jaw flexed. He leaned forward, scanning the paper. Are you sure about this? She didn't blink. I'm damn sure. An hour later, Rachel was escorted out of the building by security. No drama, no press release, just silence, as if a spell had been broken. Denise stood at the window of her office and watched the parking lot below. A black car pulled away slowly. Rachel didn't look back. Later that day, Elon called a full department meeting. It was the first time Denise saw every division head, every liaison, every senior team member in one room. Elon stood at the front with the stillness of someone who knew the weight of his words. There's been a breach of trust, he began. One that affected not only our finances, but the integrity of the work we claim to value. Some of us believe innovation starts in labs, but it doesn't. It starts in people. He turned his eyes toward Denise. She reminded us of that. There was a quiet ripple of acknowledgement, a few nods, a few expressions too stunned to hide. Effective immediately, he continued. Denise Holloway will oversee our expanded community division. She'll have full autonomy to lead, to grow, and to hold us accountable to the people we claim to serve. Denise's breath caught. For a moment, the whole room blurred, like the air had thickened and she was moving through it slowly. Then came the applause, not thunderous, not choreographed, but real. She exhaled, and it felt like breathing for the first time in months. Over the following weeks, change rolled in like a tide, quiet but unstoppable. Denise's new division launched. Satellite programs in Oakland, Fresno, and East LA. Local educators were brought in to design curriculum, side by side with engineers. Formerly incarcerated youth were given internships in drone programming. Kids from neighborhoods where dreams went to die were being taught to build rovers, design rockets, and speak their truth in the language of science. She didn't just create access, she created ownership. And she did it her way, no polish, no posturing, just presence. At the opening of the South LA Innovation Hub, a facility built in partnership with local leaders, not imposed on them, Denise stood at the podium. Micah was in the front row, legs swinging, pride radiating from his every movement. She took the mic and looked out at the sea of faces, teachers, parents, children who now knew words like aerodynamics and orbital velocity. When I first walked into SpaceX, I thought I was stepping into someone else's world. She said, voice steady, but the truth is this world belongs to all of us, it always did. Some people just needed to be reminded. The crowd stood, applause rising like a wave. Micah ran up to hug her afterward, and she picked him up despite his growing size. He buried his face into her shoulder and whispered, "You're a superhero, Mum." She kissed his cheek. "No, baby. I'm just me, and that's enough." A few weeks later, Denise received a package at her new office, no sender listed. Inside, a small black box. She opened it to find a lapel pin, silver, shaped like a rocket, with a flame etched beneath it. Beneath the pin, a card. "Not all heroes need capes. Some just need opportunity. Thank you for not wasting yours." A friend, Denise, stared at the card for a long time. Then she pinned the rocket to her blazer, close to her heart. She never found out who sent the first warning message, but it didn't matter anymore. The real win wasn't surviving SpaceX. The real win was bending it towards something human. And every kid who now walked through the doors of the program she built wasn't just entering a building. They were entering a future. One where kindness wasn't weakness, where integrity wasn't naive, where a single mother from Lancaster could change the shape of a company that launched rockets into the stars, because she never forgot how it felt to stand on the ground and look up, wondering if she belonged. Now she didn't have to wonder, she knew, and the world would never forget her name.